I have the historical details and the full arc. Writing the 3,500-word script now set in Lewistown with verified 1880s Montana history woven in. The draft is 900 words over target, trimming while keeping the emotional beats and historical details intact. Montana, September 1887. There are men who grow old gracefully, who move into the later chapters of their lives with the quiet acceptance of someone who has made peace with what is and what is not. Jacob Walker was not quite that man. He was 58 years old, and he had not made peace with anything. He had simply stopped fighting, which is a different thing entirely, though from the outside the two can look remarkably similar. He ran a cattle ranch 12 miles outside of Lewistown, the county seat of Fergus County, on land his father had broken and his own hands had kept. 300 acres of high grass and rocky creek beds, and the particular silence of a place where one person has lived alone for too long. The ranch was good. The cattle were healthy. The fences held. Jacob himself was the thing that had stopped being tended. He ate, he worked, he spoke when spoken to, and was considered by everyone in Fergus County to be a decent man of sound character. His wife, Margaret, had died 11 years ago. Not suddenly. The fever had taken 3 months to do what it did, which in some ways was worse than sudden, because he had watched it coming and been unable to stop it. After Margaret, there had been grief, and then work, and then a kind of settled quietness that he had eventually stopped distinguishing from contentment. The winter before had tested every rancher in central Montana. The Great Die-Up, they called it afterward, when the brutal winter of 1886 and 1887 had killed hundreds of thousands of cattle across the northern plains. Jacob had lost neighbors to ruin. Men he had known since boyhood had watched their herds die in the snow because they had still run open range. Jacob had been luckier, or perhaps more careful. His father had fenced early. Jacob had built a hay barn and kept shelter close. He had come through with most of his cattle intact, while families 2 valleys over lost everything. He had helped where he could, quietly, without making a performance of his kindness. But he carried the memory of those empty pastures, the way a man carries a stone in his pocket, always there, always waiting his step. He had a ranch and a horse, and a good dog named Porter, who asked nothing of him but proximity. He had, without fully deciding to, concluded that this was sufficient. He rode into Lewiston on a Tuesday in September for salt blocks and feed and a pound of coffee and nothing else. The town was busy that morning. Lewiston had grown quickly since the gold rush in the Judith Mountains back in 1880, and the streets near the schoolhouse still had the energy of a place building itself day by day. He came home with a name he could not stop thinking about, which was, all things considered, the more significant purchase. Clara Bennett had arrived in Lewiston 3 weeks before Jacob first saw her. She was 29 years old. She had come from Billings, the railroad town founded along the Northern Pacific Line, to take the position vacated by old Mr. Hennessy, who had retired in June after 22 years of teaching Lewistown's children everything he knew. She had dark hair and steady eyes, and the particular quality of someone who listens completely, not waiting for their turn to speak, but actually receiving what is said and doing something with it. Within 3 weeks, she had become the most talked about person in Fergus County. 3 men had attempted to call on her formally. She had received them all with warmth and declined them all with clarity. The banker's son, Franklin Pierce, Jr., had sent flowers twice. She had put them in the schoolroom where the children could enjoy them, which Franklin had not intended, but Clara thought was the better use of flowers. Jacob watched none of this. He was 12 miles out and had no occasion to be in town more than once a week. She spoke to him first. "Excuse me," she said, from the schoolhouse steps. "You would not happen to know where I could find someone who could look at my stove. It has been smoking badly since last week, and the children are suffering for it." He stopped his horse. He looked at her. She looked back at him with the direct, patient gaze of someone who has asked a reasonable question and is waiting for a reasonable answer. "Tom Briggs," he said, "at the hardware store. Tell him Jacob Walker sent you, and he will not overcharge." "Thank you," she said. Then, "I am Clara Bennett. I teach here." "I know," he said. "Jacob Walker. I ranch." "I know," she said. He rode on. 14 seconds of conversation. He counted them later, which he did not admit to anyone. He did, however, mention Tom Briggs's name to Tom himself the following Thursday, just to ensure the stove situation was properly handled. "Already handled," Tom said, with a look that Jacob chose not to interpret. "Good," Jacob said. He bought his coffee and left. Tom watched him go and said nothing, but he was smiling. Jacob did not see that either. She came to the ranch for the first time in October. She had a student, young Thomas Aldridge, 11 years old, whose father ran the property 2 miles south of Jacob's. Thomas had been missing school, and Clara made a practice of visiting the homes of children who missed school. She stopped at his gate on the way back. "Your fences are in good condition," she said, by way of greeting. He was repairing the gate hinge. He looked up slowly, the way a man does when he is not sure what he is looking at. "Thank you. Thomas says you taught him to ride last summer." "His father asked me to. He says you are patient with horses." She studied the mare tied at the post. "And, apparently, with 11-year-old boys." "Horses are easier," he said. She laughed, quick and genuine, the kind that arrives before the person decides to allow it. He almost smiled. Almost. She stayed 20 minutes, talking about Thomas, the school, whether winter was coming early. When she left, he went back to the hinge, and found, somewhat to his surprise, that the afternoon had acquired a quality it had not had before. She came back 2 weeks later with a book about cattle management she had found in the school library. He took it. He had already read it 10 years ago. He read it again anyway. which he told himself was because the chapter on winter grazing had new relevance after the die-up, and not for any other reason. The third visit, he had made coffee, 2 cups, without thinking about it. Then he had looked at the 2 cups on the kitchen table and thought about what that meant, and decided not to think about it further. She arrived at 2, as she generally did, and he handed her the coffee, and she took it the way she took everything, directly, without performance, and sat at his kitchen table. She looked at the 2 cups, then at him, then back at the cups. She said nothing. He said nothing. Porter the dog walked in, looked at both of them, and walked back out. "Smart dog," Clara said finally. "Yes," Jacob said. "He knows when to leave a room." Then Clara smiled into her coffee, and Jacob looked at the wall, and the kitchen was very quiet, and somehow, inexplicably, entirely comfortable. The town noticed. Towns always notice. By November, the Tuesday visits were known about. Martha Holt, who had known Jacob for 30 years, thought it was wonderful. "That man has been alone since Margaret," she told anyone who would listen. Franklin Pierce Sr. thought it was inappropriate and said so carefully to the right people. Tom Briggs at the hardware store, when asked his opinion, said only that Jacob came back to ask about that stove. The banker's son, Franklin Jr., encountered Jacob at the feed store on a Thursday. "I hear Miss Bennett has been visiting your ranch," he said with the careful tone of a man trying to sound casual and not quite managing it. Jacob looked at him. "She visits Thomas Aldrich's family, too, and the Hendersons. She visits families of students twice a week." Jacob picked up his salt block. "Have a good Thursday, Franklin." He rode home. He was not, he told himself, bothered by the conversation. Porter disagreed. The dog could always tell when Jacob was lying to himself, and spent the evening sitting closer than usual. Ruth Deacon at the post office reported the exchange to Clara the following morning. Clara listened, nodded, and said, "He picked up his salt block and left." "Good," Clara said. "That is the correct response." "To not being bothered," she said, and she went to teach her class. Clara had not told Jacob the real reason she had come to Montana, not the short version she gave at church socials, not the practical one about the teaching position. She had come to Montana to find out what was hers. She had not expected Jacob Walker to be part of that answer. But there was something in him she recognized. The way he listened without waiting for his turn. The way he said true things plainly. The way he had made 2 cups of coffee before he knew she was coming and had never once mentioned it. Jacob Walker did not perform anything, including any awareness that she found this extraordinary, which was possibly the most extraordinary thing about it. If you're listening to this from your kitchen in the early morning, or from your chair in the late evening when the house has gone quiet, I want you to know how grateful I am that you are here. Thousands of you follow these stories from places I never imagined this voice would reach. If this tale is giving you comfort tonight, a like on this video means more than I can say. And tell me in the comments, what country are you listening from today? Now, let us return to Jacob Walker, who was about to say the most sincere and most wrong thing he had ever said. It was December when he said it. They had fallen into a habit. After coffee and conversation, they would sometimes walk to the east fence where the land opened up and the view went all the way toward the Judith Mountains. In December, it was the particular stark beauty of Montana in winter. The grass silver brown, the mountains showing their snow, the sky going pink and amber as the sun went down. They stood at the fence in the cold air, and Jacob said nothing for a long time, because he was thinking about something he had been refusing to bring to the surface. Porter sat between them, looking at the mountains with the philosophical expression of a dog who has decided the humans will sort this out eventually. Then Jacob brought it to the surface. "Clara," he said, "I need to say something." She turned to look at him. "I think you should consider spending your Tuesdays differently." He looked at the mountains. "You are 29 years old, and I am 58. You are too young for an old rancher. You deserve someone who can." "Jacob, let me finish," she said. "You are going to say something you have decided is true without asking me whether I agree." He stopped. She was looking at him with the expression she sometimes turned on students who had given a confident wrong answer. Not unkind, but completely unwilling to pretend the answer was right. "You are 58, she said. "I know that. I can count." She took a step closer. "But I am not interested in your age. I am interested in you. You listen. You tell the truth. You made coffee for 2 before you knew I was coming. And you have never once mentioned it." Porter looked at Jacob. Jacob looked at Porter. "Do not," Jacob said to the dog. Porter looked back at the mountains. Clara's expression did something complicated. Not quite a smile, but close. "To me," she said quietly, "you are perfect." The mountains held the last of the light. The cold wind moved through the silver grass. Jacob Walker, who had stopped expecting things, stood at the east fence of his ranch and felt something arrive in his chest that had no name and no warning and no regard whatsoever for the careful conclusions he had spent 11 years arriving at. Porter, sensing the gravity of the situation, sat on Jacob's foot. "You do not know everything about me," he said finally. "I know enough," she said. "Margaret, I know about Margaret. You loved her. She died. You have been alone for 11 years, and you have convinced yourself that is the natural end of things. It is not." He looked at her. "Clara, in 10 years I will be 68, he said, "and you will be 39. And if you are half the man at 68 that you are now," she paused, "I will count myself fortunate." He felt his throat tighten. She reached into her coat pocket and handed him a folded letter. It was not addressed to him. It was addressed to Margaret Walker. in a handwriting he had not seen in 11 years. "I found this in the school records," Clara said. Mr. Hennessy kept correspondence from parents and former students. This was never sent. It was written by a girl named Ruth Deacon when she was 16. She is the postmistress now. She wanted to thank your wife for keeping her in school when her mother was dying. She said Margaret sat with her mother 3 nights so Ruth could finish her examinations. She said Margaret told her that being alone is not the same as being unloved, and that a person can be worthy of tenderness at any age. Jacob unfolded the letter with hands that were not steady. He read it standing at the fence in the December cold, and when he finished, he stood there a long time, with tears on his face he did not try to hide. Margaret had never mentioned those nights. That was her way. Quiet sacrifice done without announcement, without ledger, without any expectation that the world would return the favor. Clara waited. She did not rush him. She did not fill the silence with comfort that would have been too small for the moment. When he finally folded the letter, he said, "She was a good woman." "Yes," Clara said. "I would not ask you to forget her. I am not asking you to choose between a memory and a life. I am asking you to consider that you might have both, that grief and hope are not enemies, that you are allowed to want the morning again." "Will you come to church with me on Sunday?" he said. "Not as a neighbor, as the woman I would like to court properly, with no hiding and no apologies." "Yes," she said. "And Jacob? I came to Montana because my mother died in Billings last spring, and I finally understood I had been living the life other people chose for me. I did not expect to find you, but I am not sorry I did." "I am not sorry either," he said. They stood at the fence until the light was gone and rode back to the house together, and Porter trotted ahead as if he had personally arranged the entire evening. Jacob and Clara were married in the spring of 1888 in the Lewistown church, with Thomas Aldridge holding Porter's leash and 20 school children watching from the front pew. It was a simple ceremony. When the minister said, "You may kiss your bride," Jacob did so, gently, as if he were being given something he still could not quite believe was his to keep. There was a reception at the schoolhouse. Ruth Deacon cried and said she had been waiting 11 years for someone to read that letter. Clara squeezed her hand and said Margaret would have been glad. On November 8, 1889, when Montana became the 41st state in the Union, Jacob and Clara rode into Lewistown for the celebration. Bells rang. Children waved flags made of cloth scraps. Clara held Jacob's arm and watched the parade move down Main Street, and she said, "We came to a territory looking for a new life, and we stayed for a state." Jacob looked at the crowd, at the mountains beyond, at his wife, and said, "Best decision I never planned to make." That winter they moved Margaret's photograph from the bedroom to the parlor shelf, not to replace her, but to make room for the life that was growing in the house again. Clara insisted Jacob keep it where he could see it, "Some loves do not compete," she said. "Some loves teach you how to love again." Their first child, a boy they named Henry, was born in 1890. Their daughter May arrived 2 years later. The ranch filled with noise. Porter aged gracefully and was followed in time by a second Porter son, of the first. Same eyes, same opinions. Jacob built a bookshelf for Clara's schoolbooks and novels. Clara planted a kitchen garden and persuaded Jacob that evening tea was superior to evening coffee. He maintained this was a defeat. She maintained it was an improvement. One evening in their 10th year together, Clara found Jacob in the barn, repairing a bridle Margaret had given him on their 20th anniversary. He was holding the leather in his hands a long time. Clara stood in the doorway and said, "Do you need a minute?" He looked up. "I was thinking about how she would have liked you," he said. "I know," Clara said softly. "I think about that too. Not because I am second. Because I am grateful she taught you how to be kind before I ever arrived." Jacob's eyes filled. He set down the bridle and opened his arms, and Clara walked into them without hurry. They stood that way in the barn while the light went down. Two people who had learned that love is not a single room, but a house with many doors, and that every honest door deserves to be opened. On a summer evening in their 10th year together, Jacob sat on the porch. Somewhere in the fields, Henry and May were arguing about something. He could hear it in the rhythm of their voices without hearing the words, and he knew that tomorrow neither of them would remember what it was about. The second Porter was asleep at his feet. Clara came out with tea. She sat beside him and looked at the mountains. "I was wrong, you know," he said, "about the thing I said at the fence." "I know," she said. "I told you so at the time. You were very patient about it." "I am a school teacher," she said. "Patience is professional." He smiled. The mountains held the last of the summer light. He put his hand over hers on the armrest, the same gesture 10 years in, and still the same, and thought about a Tuesday in September when he had ridden into Lewistown for salt blocks and coffee and nothing else. He thought about 14 seconds of conversation outside a schoolhouse. He thought about 2 cups of coffee on a kitchen table and a dog who always knew before he did. He thought about the east fence in December and the words she had said, and how wrong he had been, and how grateful he was for it. "Thank you," he said quietly. She looked at him. "For what?" "For counting differently than I did," he said. She put her head against his shoulder. "Someone had to," she said. And the Montana evening held them both, and the mountains did what they always did, and it was by every measure that actually counted more than enough. Jacob Walker had made an error that most of us would recognize. He decided in advance what was possible for him. He looked at his age and concluded that certain things were no longer available, that the window had closed, that the time had passed. He was wrong. He had confused the arithmetic of years with the arithmetic of value. Clara counted the man who listened without waiting for his turn, who told the truth plainly, who made 2 cups of coffee before he knew he needed to and never mentioned it, who built a shelf from good wood measured to fit the books she already had without being asked. The heart does not follow a calendar. It looks at a person at who they actually are in the specific daily reality of their life, and it knows what it knows. You do not age out of being worthy of love. It is never too late to be found. Thank you for spending this time with me today. Wherever you are in this world, I am grateful you are here. If this story stayed with you, subscribe so you do not miss the next one. Until next time, keep believing that the best chapters are not always the earliest ones.